The Tonight Show was 40 minutes into its Tuesday taping when Jimmy Fallon noticed something unusual happening in the studio audience. While most viewers were laughing and applauding at his monologue, an elderly woman in the fourth row was writing intently in a small notebook, occasionally looking up to watch him, then returning to her careful handwriting with renewed focus. Rose Martinez, 81 years old with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore a floral print dress that she'd carefully chosen that morning. Her weathered hands moved steadily across the lined pages of a worn composition book, the kind children use in elementary school. She wrote with a blue ballpoint pen that she gripped tightly, as if the words she was capturing were precious and could not be lost. During the first commercial break, Jimmy found himself drawn to her section of the audience. There was something about her concentrated attention, the way she seemed to be documenting rather than just experiencing, that intrigued him. "Excuse me," Jimmy said, approaching her row with his characteristic warm smile. "I couldn't help but notice you taking very detailed notes. Are you a critic? Please tell me you're not from the New York Times." Rose looked up, startled to find Jimmy Fallon standing right in front of her. Her face immediately brightened with a mixture of surprise and delight. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Fallon. No, I'm not a critic. I'm Rose Martinez, and I'm writing everything down for my husband Arthur." "Writing what down for Arthur?" Rose held up her notebook, which Jimmy could now see was filled with neat handwriting in multiple colors of ink. "Everything you say, every joke you tell, every funny face you make. Arthur can't be here with me, so I bring the show to him." Jimmy was intrigued. "Where is Arthur tonight?" Rose's expression shifted slightly, taking on the patient sadness of someone who had learned to carry difficult news with grace. "Arthur is at Sunset Manor Care Center in Queens. He has Alzheimer's disease, and he's been there for 3 years now. But Mr. Fallon, he loves your show. Or at least he used to love your show when he could still follow along." Jimmy felt something tighten in his chest. "And you write down what happens so you can tell him about it." "Every single night for 3 years," Rose said proudly. "I watch your show, I write down everything I can remember, and then the next day I go to the nursing home and I read in my notes. I tell him about your monologue, about your guests, about the games you play. I try to describe your expressions and how the audience reacted." The studio was preparing to return from commercial break, but Jimmy found himself completely absorbed in Rose's story. "Rose, can he understand what you're telling him?" Rose's smile became both heartbreaking and beautiful. "He doesn't respond anymore. He hasn't spoken in 8 months. But Mr. Fallon, I know he's still in there. And even if he isn't, even if he can't understand, I'm not going to stop. Because for 37 years of our marriage, we watched late-night television together every single night. Johnny Carson, then David Letterman, then Conan, and now you. It was our time, our ritual. I'm not going to let Alzheimer's take that away from us." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, processing the profound dedication Rose was describing. "How long have you been coming to tapings?" "This is my first time here in person," Rose admitted. "I usually just watch at home and take notes from the TV. But today is Arthur's 84th birthday, and I thought maybe if I could see you in person, if I could write down what it was really like to be in this studio, it would make the story I tell him tomorrow more special." The stage manager was signaling that they needed to return to the show, but Jimmy made a quick decision. "Rose, would you mind staying after the show tonight? I'd like to talk to you more about Arthur." Rose nodded enthusiastically, clutching her notebook to her chest. The show continued, but Jimmy found himself performing slightly differently, knowing that Rose was documenting every moment for Arthur. He made his expressions a bit more pronounced, his physical comedy a bit more detailed, thinking about how Rose would describe these moments to her husband the next day. After the cameras stopped rolling and the audience had filed out, Jimmy found Rose waiting patiently in her seat, still writing in her notebook. "What are you writing now?" Jimmy asked. "I'm trying to capture what it felt like to talk to you during the commercial break," Rose explained. "The way you smiled, how kind you were, what your voice sounds like up close. Arthur always wondered about things like that when we watched at home." Jimmy sat down in the seat next to her. "Rose, tell me about Arthur. What was he like before he got sick?" Rose's entire demeanor changed, becoming animated and joyful. "Oh, Arthur was the funniest man I ever met. He was a high school math teacher for 40 years, and he could make even algebra hilarious. The students loved him because he'd turn word problems into little comedy sketches." She flipped through her notebook to show Jimmy pages of notes from previous shows. "See, I try to write down not just what you said, but how Arthur would have reacted. Like here, when you did that impression of Christopher Walken last week, I wrote, Arthur would have laughed so hard he'd start coughing, and then he'd spend the rest of the night trying to do his own Walken impression, which was terrible but adorable." Jimmy read through several pages of Rose's notes, amazed by the detail and love evident in every line. She had created a complete record of not just his shows, but of how she imagined Arthur experiencing them. "Rose, this is incredible. You've essentially been writing love letters to Arthur for 3 years." "I suppose I have," Rose said with a soft smile, "though they're very long love letters filled with jokes about current events." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, then looked at Rose with sudden determination. "Rose, what would you say if I told you I wanted to meet Arthur?" Rose's eyes widened. You want to meet Arthur?" "I want to meet the man who inspired someone to document 3 years of late-night television out of love, and I want to meet him on his birthday." Rose started crying softly. "Mr. Fallon, that would mean everything to me. But I have to warn you, Arthur might not know who you are. He might not respond at all." "That's okay," Jimmy said. "Sometimes the most important performances are for an audience of one, even if that audience can't applaud back." 2 days later, Jimmy Fallon walked into Sunset Manor Care Center in Queens, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and a gift bag filled with Tonight Show memorabilia. Rose met him in the lobby, more nervous than she'd been since her wedding day. "I still can't believe you're doing this," Rose said as they walked down the hallway toward Arthur's room. "I've been telling the nurses for days, and none of them believe me." They stopped outside room 237, and Rose took a deep breath. Arthur has good days and bad days. Today has been a quiet day. She opened the door to reveal a small, neat room with afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. In a chair by the window sat a man who had clearly once been tall and robust, but was now frail and still. Arthur Martinez had thinning white hair and kind eyes that looked out the window, without seeming to focus on anything in particular. "Arthur, sweetheart," Rose said gently, approaching his chair, "I have a surprise for you. Do you remember how I tell you about the Tonight Show every day? Well, today I brought someone special to meet you." Jimmy approached slowly, not wanting to startle Arthur. "Hi, Arthur. I'm Jimmy. I'm the guy Rose has been telling you about, the one who tells jokes on TV every night." Arthur didn't respond, but Jimmy thought he saw his eyes shift slightly in Jimmy's direction. Rose pulled up another chair. "Mr. Fallon, would you mind if I read Arthur yesterday's notes? Sometimes I think it helps when I read to him in person." "Of course," Jimmy said, settling into a chair across from Arthur. Rose opened her notebook and began reading in a clear, loving voice. "Yesterday, Jimmy wore his dark blue suit, the one that brings out his eyes. He started the monologue with a joke about the weather in New York, and he made this face." Rose paused and made an exaggerated expression. "You know, Arthur, the face he makes when he's pretending to be confused." As Rose continued reading, Jimmy watched Arthur's face carefully. While there was no obvious response, Jimmy noticed that Arthur's breathing seemed to become more regular, and his hands, which had been restless, became still. "Arthur," Jimmy said softly, "Rose tells me you were a teacher. She says you were the funny teacher that all the kids loved." No response, but Jimmy continued anyway. "I bet you would have been great on television. Rose says you could make even math funny. And trust me, that's harder than what I do." Jimmy reached into his gift bag and pulled out a Tonight Show coffee mug. "Rose, would you put this on Arthur's bedside table? So every morning when the nurses give him coffee, he can have it in a Tonight Show mug. Maybe he'll remember that he has friends who think about him." Rose was crying as she placed the mug carefully on Arthur's table. "Arthur, did you hear that? Jimmy brought you a present." Jimmy looked at Arthur, then at Rose, and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Rose, would you mind if I did a little bit of my monologue for Arthur? Just a few jokes?" "He would love that," Rose whispered. Jimmy stood up and, in the small nursing home room, began doing his Tonight Show monologue routine. He told jokes about New York traffic, about the weather, about celebrities, using all the facial expressions and physical comedy that Rose had been documenting for 3 years. And then something remarkable happened. Arthur smiled. It was small, barely perceptible, but Jimmy saw it. Rose saw it. The first smile Arthur had shown in months. "Arthur," Rose exclaimed softly, "you're smiling, sweetheart. You remember Jimmy's jokes." Jimmy continued with a few more jokes, and Arthur's smile lingered. His eyes seemed more focused, more present than they had been when Jimmy first arrived. "Rose," Jimmy said quietly, "I think Arthur is enjoying the live performance." Rose was sobbing now, but they were tears of joy. "Arthur, my love, Jimmy came all this way to make you laugh, just like I always told you he would if he could." Jimmy sat back down and took Arthur's hand gently. "Arthur, your wife Rose is the most devoted person I've ever met. For 3 years, she's made sure you didn't miss a single episode of our show. She's written down every joke, every segment, every moment, because she loves you, and she believes in the power of laughter and love." Arthur's eyes moved to Jimmy's face and stayed there, the most direct eye contact he'd made with anyone in months. "I want you to know," Jimmy continued, "that because of Rose, because of what she's taught me about love and dedication, I'm going to make sure that no one else in your situation has to miss out on laughter. Rose has inspired me to start bringing comedy to people who can't come to comedy." Jimmy looked at Rose. "Rose, what would you say if I told you I wanted to start a program where we bring the Tonight Show to nursing homes and hospitals, where we make sure that love and laughter can reach people even when they can't reach back?" Rose could barely speak through her tears. "I would say that Arthur would be so proud. He always believed that laughter was the most important medicine." Jimmy spent another hour with Arthur and Rose, telling stories, sharing jokes, and watching Arthur's small but meaningful responses. When it was time to leave, Jimmy promised Rose that this wouldn't be their last visit. "Rose, I want you to keep writing those letters. Keep telling Arthur about the show. And I want you to start including in your notes that he has a friend named Jimmy who thinks about him every night." On his way out, Jimmy stopped at the nurse's station. "I want to arrange for this nursing home to have cable television in every room, and I want to make sure Arthur's room has the best possible TV so Rose can watch The Tonight Show with him every night." 6 months later, Jimmy returned to Sunset Manor, but this time he brought cameras. He had started the Laughter Medicine program, bringing comedy to medical facilities across the country. Arthur's room was their first official stop. Arthur's condition had continued to decline, but Rose was still there every day, still writing in her notebook, still reading him the day's Tonight Show notes. And sometimes, just sometimes, Arthur would still smile at Jimmy's jokes. "Rose," Jimmy said during that visit, "you've changed how I think about my job. You've shown me that comedy isn't just about the audience we can see laughing back at us. It's also about the Arthurs of the world, the people who need laughter even if they can't show us they're receiving it. Rose had started volunteering with the Laughter Medicine Program, helping other families understand how to bring joy to loved ones with dementia and other conditions that limited communication. Arthur taught me, Rose told Jimmy, that love doesn't require a response to be real. I would have kept reading him those notes even if he never smiled again, because love isn't about what you get back. It's about what you're willing to give. Arthur passed away peacefully 8 months later, with Rose holding his hand and reading him notes from Jimmy's show from the night before. But the program Rose had inspired continued, bringing laughter and connection to thousands of people in medical facilities across the country. Jimmy kept one of Rose's notebooks in his office, the one from Arthur's birthday week when Jimmy first met them. On difficult days, when the pressures of television seemed overwhelming, he would read Rose's careful documentation of his jokes and remember why comedy mattered. Rose continued watching The Tonight Show every night, but now she watched it with other residents at Sunset Manor, sharing her note-taking techniques with other spouses and family members who wanted to bring the outside world to their loved ones. Arthur always said, Rose told Jimmy during one of his regular visits to the nursing home, that the best teachers are the ones who keep teaching even when the student can't tell you they're learning. I think he would say the same thing about comedians. Jimmy realized that Rose had taught him the most important lesson of his career, that the highest calling of entertainment isn't to make people laugh who are already happy, but to bring light to those sitting in darkness, to provide connection for those who feel isolated, and to prove that love and laughter can reach anywhere, even when they can't reach back. The letter writing tradition Rose had started became a movement. Families across the country began documenting television shows, books, and daily life for loved ones, with dementia creating bridges of connection that transcended the limitations of disease. But perhaps the most beautiful part of the story was simpler than all of that. For 3 years, Rose had proven that love is not a conversation, but a commitment, not a dialogue, but a dedication. She had loved Arthur not because he could love her back, but because loving him was who she was. And Jimmy learned that sometimes the most important audience for comedy is an audience of one, sitting quietly in a nursing home room, who may not be able to applaud, but who still, in ways we can't always understand, receives every joke as a gift and every laugh as a letter of love. It wasn't just late-night television. It was a reminder that the most powerful communication happens not when someone talks back, but when someone refuses to stop talking forward, carrying love across any distance, through any silence, for as long as they have breath to speak and heart to hope.